Give me another good image I can use from Eugene instead, so I can tell your story. From Alder, okay. But all that stuff is documented. We continue to learn more. This, I believe the one on the left here is from Springfield?
No, it's North Eugene.
North Eugene, okay. Is it still there? How's that working out?
It's still there, it's weird. You're not sure what you should do.
But the important thing is, it's when it was put in, that was probably one of the very first bona fide cycle tracks in the US. Now they're all the rage, and people are talking about wanting to do this sort of thing on certainly on more major significant streets. But the same with a couple of the other things in Eugene that we saw today, and which I've seen before. The spirit of innovation has been alive and well here, and I hope that continues, because that's the way we learn how to do stuff and do stuff better. We actually filled up the bike box this morning during the ride with about, I don't know, 10 or 12 of us, maybe 15 of us. So definitely some capacity issues there. We need a bigger bike box. But it's amazing to think that something as simple as this wasn't in the manuals 5 years ago. So we continue to improve and learn more about the technology and the type of stuff that you can do to help people get out and ride and find their way through the city. But you know, by and large, this isn't very difficult to figure out. We know how to do this stuff. There are guidebooks, there are manuals. Bike parking, which we know we need, isn't very hard to figure out. Again, what people need or want, what a good bike rack looks like. We're getting more creative about how we design the racks and cover them, and we've got manuals that show where you place the racks in relation to the wall and all the rest of it. So there's lots of technical information out there. That isn't the issue. We know how to sign and mark and signalize things, getting better at that all the time. I see that you're using this style of sign in Eugene, which I think is great. It's really a lot more helpful than just the green bike route sign. So I would suggest it's not lack of technical expertise or knowledge that's holding us back. So perhaps it's the weather. Perhaps it's your crappy English weather that's holding you back here. You can go to look at almost any geographic type, any topography, any demographic type in the country, and there's a more bike-friendly community out there than you would imagine. You look at more bike-friendly communities in the US, like Minneapolis, like Madison, Cambridge, Massachusetts, that are definitely northern tier. You look at hilly, wet places like Portland and Seattle, and Eugene is relatively flat, right? So I don't really think it's those issues that are holding us back, and Canadian cities have 3 times the level of bike use that US cities do, so I don't think that's an excuse that holds much water. This is the opening or inauguration of a provincial bike route network in Quebec that's about 4,000 kilometers, about 2,500 miles long, cost them over the course of about 10 to 12 years, $200 million to sign and mark and add some shoulders and do some rail trail type projects. They're annually getting more than 100 million back in economic returns from just having this route there, from the bed and breakfast traffic and whatever that it generates. And there are communities throughout the province of Quebec that are almost solely existent now on the travel and tourism impact of La Route Verte. So we can do that stuff. If you can do it in Quebec for probably only 9 months of the year, then you can certainly do it here in the very temperate Eugene climate. I'm duty bound to show at least one picture from Copenhagen during any presentation related to cycling, so this is at least one of them. But it struck me, this was the couple of interesting things about this. Number one, they have these bike counters on their street. This bike counter is right outside City Hall, and it counts in real time the number of cyclists. For those of you whose Danish is a bit rusty or you haven't taken that in school, the number of cyclists who've passed by that day up to that point. So it's 8:41 in the morning. It's 2 degrees Celsius, which is what, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it was December the 16th or something like that. 1,500 cyclists have been past City Hall on this street, on one street. for most bike clubs, that's a major century ride. 1,500 riders is a big, big deal. That's the kind of volume that Copenhagen enjoys. Later that same day, I was in Odense, which is home of Hans Christian Andersen and fairy tales and all that good stuff. The snow was falling, and people were still out riding in just the worst conditions imaginable. The cycle tracks really were cleared before the roads and all the rest of it. It was like being in a fairy tale. But that infrastructure is there, and it isn't a question of weather. I mean, there's always good clothing. So not lack of funding, not lack of technical knowledge, not geography or demographics, certainly not a lack of good reasons for getting more people riding and walking. So what is it? Is it this much vaunted love affair with the car that we think we have in this country? Which, is certainly powerful, and we've done an awful lot to facilitate it, but it's an extraordinarily costly relationship that we have with our cars. And it's, I don't know, it just, when you look at that and you begin to add it up, I think it's at least about time that we had at least a fling, maybe a one-night stand with the bike, just to see if it's going to work, see if there's any future in it. And as John Burke from Trek now says, the even better news is we're a cheap date. It doesn't cost much to do what it takes to get people riding. It doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as this, but the reality is we don't have a love affair with the car. We have a love affair with the quickest, cheapest, most convenient way of getting around. And we've made that the car. For the last 50 years, we just have. That's a matter of fact, not an opinion. In Copenhagen, cycling is a quick, easy, convenient, cheap, inexpensive way of getting around, so people do it. They don't do it because they're cyclists, they do it because it just works. That's, I think, where we need to get this. And the good news in lesson number 4, for those of you who are keeping count or actually writing any of this down, is that for years we were sort of the ultimate faith-based movement. We believed that this stuff would work, but we weren't actually sure. We didn't have any numbers. We didn't have any real documentation. But now we do. And more cities and other communities are taking the time to measure what happens when you put in bike infrastructure, when you do the bike education, when you offer the incentives and encouragement programs. And I know you don't want to hear about Portland, so I'll keep it to a minimum. I've taken out about 3/4 of the slides I usually show from Portland, just so I don't get stuff thrown at me. But it's worth remembering in Portland, back in 1973, this was their bikeway network. You all don't need the geography lesson that most people do. The Columbia River on the top, Willamette River going down the middle. Portland's bike infrastructure was basically a few paths on the bridges over the major rivers, and that was it. And I remember the first time I visited Portland in 1994, having heard all the yap about how great it was and how green it was, and they were doing good things for transit, and it's a very walkable city, but the bike network was really not up to much in 1994. But starting about then, they really started to put it together, really started to build the bike network to, what is it now, about 300 miles or something like that. And they had documented what happened as they went through that transformation. And it's now looks a lot more complete, and I'm sure it's even more complete still, if only I could get up to date with this stuff. But they counted year after year the number of people riding. You know the story. It used to be in 1990, 2,500 people crossing the bridges by bike. Now it's over 18,000, probably pushing 20,000 by now. And they've done the counts. They've measured the number of crashes. They can tell you how much safer it is. They can tell you what they haven't had to spend to provide extra car parking or extra travel lanes or new bridges across the river because of the amount of traffic they've been able to accommodate by bike. So that's part of the good news. But lesson number 5 is that it isn't just Portland that's telling us this. This almost exact same chart is from Minneapolis, where they've seen the exact same thing happen, where as the infrastructure goes up, the crashes go down, the level of safety and the popularity of cycling goes in the right direction. So we're seeing this kind of safety in numbers and the momentum of cycling build the activity levels in community after community, and we're documenting it, which makes it a lot more believable. So that's good. If you look at the 2000 census compared to, I think here we go to 2008 when gas prices were at their highest, 2009 the numbers were very similar. Everyone saw a bit of an increase in bike traffic, but the cities that had actually done something to encourage that, who put in bike lanes, who put in bike parking, who'd done the education programs, had a good bike to work day, they saw a much more significant increase in bike traffic than the cities that just really sort of didn't care, it just happened. So your Dallases and your Houstons and Atlantas of the world, there were a few more people riding, but your Portlands and Chicagos and New York Cities and Washington, D.C.s, there were a lot more people riding, and in your Eugenes, of course. So this stuff does make a difference, and we know what makes a difference. And the blueprint that hopefully you either picked up on the way in or will pick up on the way out was our effort to kind of capture what the DNA of a bike-friendly community really is, because through this program, we've really been able to gather a lot of data and compare what communities are doing around the country. Probably a fair few of you are familiar with the purple sign version, the current version of the Bicycle-Friendly Community Program, but we actually started it way back in 1996, and we asked 4 questions back then. Do you have a bike advisory committee? Do you spend $1 per head of your population on something related to cycling? Do you declare May to be National Bike Month? And do you at least consider bikes in your transportation projects? And if you answered yes to all 4 and sent us a check for $75, we'd send you this 1970s retro sign that said you were a bike-friendly community. And we really just didn't think that was quite the standard we wanted to set, or was really as valuable as it could be. So we totally revised it. We came up with the bronze through platinum levels, and which was hardly original, but it works really, really well to keep people enthused. And we've now seen over 450, close to 500 communities go through this application process. So we've got all the data, all the stories from those communities. And what we've seen, the stuff that really makes a difference in the better communities is, number one, someone, maybe a mayor, maybe a governor, maybe a city council member, someone like Ruth Bascom was in the 70s, right, who just puts the flag in the ground and says, we're going to do this. We're going to make this a priority. We're committed to this. This is what our community needs for economic development, for safety, for health, for whatever the reason that they're focused on may be. And they start to set some kind of performance measures, some targets, some goals, something that you can hold yourself accountable to. So when you're making an investment in the community, you can ask, is this going to help us achieve those goals? That's the stuff that really makes a difference and enables you to make some progress. You can't do it with just a few bike lanes or just a nice trail in the community. It takes the creation of a complete and a connected network of infrastructure. So you start with the trail system, you build out from that, you make sure that the key destinations are all connected. You make sure with a complete streets policy that all your streets at least accommodate bikes at some level as you build them out and as you resurface them and restripe them. All of that stuff makes a difference, and you can't do it with just engineering. It's about more than just infrastructure. The education piece, teaching people how to ride, even with great trails and great bike lanes and all the rest of it, is really critical. The encouragement piece, again, is really important. Enforcement and the legal side of things is probably the worst element of almost every community's application, but it's also really, really important to get right and to make sure that cyclists feel comfortable and like they're protected out there when they're riding.